Rare items. Well, what can I say? They're fun, they're cool, oftentimes quirky, of course difficult to find, sometimes scary to use, but most importantly, they're very expensive. One of Nvidia's rarest graphics cards ever made, the GeForce FX 5800 Ultra, is one such example of a very sought after and insanely expensive collector's item. But what if I told you it didn't quite have to be that way? What if I told you you could go out right now, say f*** the system, and build your own 5800 Ultra? Now it goes without saying that this is never going to be a real 5800 Ultra, at least in some respects. So if you're after it from purely the perspective of financial gains and making money, sincerely, go f*** yourself. But if you want to use one just for the sake of using one, because admittedly not many people have gotten to use this video card, and you're curious to see what it would have performed like, well, I have good news for you. So please, grab a drink, get some food, get comfy, and join me on this adventure where together we will build a 5800 Ultra. But first, we have to have our informational session. Or not, you could just skip this part of the video. But if you care, sit down and have a quick listen. So basically, Quadro cards, at least in the beginning of their life, they were basically just GeForce cards that kind of had different straps and a device ID, and they would use a different driver set, which was supposed to be more optimal for like computational tasks and 3D rendering and stuff. I guess things where you can't really afford to have any sort of like calculation errors or whatever. Really, there's nothing different between these cards and their GeForce counterparts. It's just that Nvidia would oftentimes turn the clocks down just a little bit, but in general, they would have no problem unlocking to a full GeForce equivalent as long as you knew what you were doing. Over time though, this started to be less and less the case, and I don't really know if many cards today are actually based off of GeForce cards other than just maybe the core. But I digress. One of the first Quadro cards to ever be its own unique kind of card was the Quadro FX 1000, and this is basically a GeForce FX 5800 that is severely cut down, underclocked, and even missing a couple components. But at its heart, this is a 5800, and most 5800s could overclock to 5800 Ultra speeds provided you had adequate cooling. So you see what I'm getting at here, and as a matter of fact, for those people who have been around my channel for a while, we've done this before. We've taken this exact card and actually turned it into a 5800, but I never really went the extra mile. And today, that's where I want to go. I want to see if I can go that extra mile to make this into an Ultra. Now, this is a completely different card. I got rid of that card a long time ago, but either way, we're starting fresh. All right, with the boring information out of the way, the last thing I want to say before we dive straight into this is I think collectively we owe a huge thanks to Silver CR and Master Chief 79. Silver CR did a lot of the dirty work, like the research and then figuring out how to calculate the straps so that the card can change its identity basically. And Master Chief 79 kind of did more memory related research in terms of figuring out how to run the memory at 500 megahertz stably. So thank you. You two have made this process a lot easier and a lot less risky. That said, let's take a look at what's on the bench today. It's gonna need a little bit of work before we can start messing around with it. Take a quick look at a couple spots. Seems like the card sustained some sort of damage during transit here, here, and right here. So it looks like we are going to have to venture into the graveyard. Ooh. And actually the card we need is right here. Would you believe it? I just so happen to have a donor card. This, ladies and gentlemen, is why you keep your dead GPUs. At least if they're kind of more rare cards, or not rare, but harder to come by cards. Even if it's dead, you'll never know when you're going to need it. This card has now saved 2 GPUs. This is not the only one. Anyways, I'll be back in just a couple minutes with the magic of editing in a couple seconds. As you may or may not be able to tell, we are now back in business. And the next step is basically to plug the card in and make sure that the rest of it's okay. Alrighty, it's moment of truth time. With those components replaced, this should hopefully work. That's a good sign. Hey, that's a good start. So now that we know the card works enough to get to the BIOS screen at least, it's time to whip out our temporary cooling solution. And with that, let's do some basic testing and talk a little bit more about what I want to do with this thing. So running a little benchmark utility for about 5 minutes at 300 megahertz caused this card to peak at 51 Celsius. That's a little scary. Ultimately though, our goal here is, as I said, to build a 5800 Ultra. So we need to get 500 on the memory and 500 on the core. The memory is going to be pretty hard, and we can talk about that later, but for now, let's try and focus on the core. The core should be pretty easy, you just need a beefier cooler. I do really want to see if we can get away with using this as the core cooler, because that would be really cool if we could build a single slot 5800 Ultra. But either way, our first point to start at with what I have available to me right now is to try and get the core to 500 megahertz without cooking itself to death. So in order to do that, we are going to have to dump the video BIOS, pump more voltage into the core, bring it up to 500, pray. Never actually tried this. Is this going to work? No. Alright, I'll be back. All we got to do is flash the card. Floppy disks, man. Useful but slow and unreliable. Alright, let's restart this thing. So before we flash the straps and everything to make this thing start looking like a 5800 Ultra, I'm just going to experiment with the clocks a little bit and leave it at its regular Quadro FX 1000 identity. First off, as I mentioned, we're going to mess with the core. That requires us to do two things. First, we're just going to go here and change this little funny number to 500. And we also have to adjust the voltage now. So the voltage for voltage number 2 needs to be changed from 5 to 7, which shows up as mystery. That's kind of scary. With that done, we're just going to go ahead and save the file. And I'll see you back in just a couple minutes. Alrighty, if everything's correct, this should work. And flash the card. Yes. Oh, you want to see something cool? Check this out. I love that. Tick, 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 tick. Alrighty, time to see if we cook this card. Alrighty, interesting. 500, that's good. We've already seen our ambient temperature jump from 35 to 40. When we run a 3D application, how much worse is it going to get when it starts pumping in the actual 1.5 volts? And here is our first hiccup. The card could not deal with it. Now, is this voltage or is this heat? I'm not sure. I'm probably going to speculate heat. Oh, but it did come back. So the core is definitely unhappy with this change right now. It could be temps, it could be something else, it could be a combo of the two. Either way, let's take this thing back out and do some modifications. And actually, while I'm in here, I think I'm going to try a different cooler. I'm going to borrow a cooler off of a different GPU that I have, and we'll see what we can do. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add these two missing capacitors here. If you look at the Quadro FX 2000 or even the GeForce FX 5800, these pads are occupied with caps of the same values as the one seen here. So I have a donor card, as I said, and I have some nice, slightly heated up caps. I have a donor card, as I said, so I kind of just tried to extract a couple of caps from it of the same value, and we're going to try sticking those on as a starter. But I'm thinking I'm going to have to sacrifice, just for now, the fancy Zalman cooler on this X800 XT-PE. I'm also going to remove these. These were installed by the previous owner, and that's actually very smart because this RAM gets very hot. But it's only really good enough to cool the RAM at like 300 megahertz, right? And we want to go to 500. That is going to be a fun thing in of itself, but for now, I do know that I'm going to have enough room on the back to put the memory heat sinks that I want to put on here. So, at bare minimum for now, we're going to replace them with something a little bit chunkier. These are still aluminum, but they're at least bigger and a bit taller. I'm just going to say it. You and I both know that is a very, very bad soldering job. I'm just going to say it. I'm not going to even try to hide the fact that this is horrible. But hopefully it's making good enough contact. Alright, so here we are back together. I'm just going to try with these new capacitors. Well, new capacitors. And if we still lock up, then I'm going to chalk this up to either a voltage issue and or heat with the core. This is probably not enough. Also, do keep in mind I did put these memory heat sinks on the back. Again, don't think that's going to make that much of a difference right now.
5 minutes later.
Yeah, we reached this point. We reached this point. And something I've never done before while doing this is a first. I actually damaged it while delidding it. So I got some work ahead of me here. Alright, the big guns are officially out. And I even brought out this. I've never even used this stuff before. I didn't know it existed. MX6. Will it actually do anything better than MX4? I have no idea. But we're delidded. We have this copper cooler. I fixed my little boo-boo down there. We have those big aluminum heat sinks. This all just barely fits and works, but can we at least get the core to work at 500? Let's find out. After running 3D Mark in a loop for about 15 minutes, our GPU now maxes out at 55 Celsius. So that's a huge improvement over the 71 we were seeing before. So I also didn't happen to notice any more freezes. So yes, I don't know for sure, but I think the freezing problem we were getting was related to the core overheating. So that's a really good sign. Now that we have this figured out, we gotta move on over to the memory. So here's the fun part. The memory. So not only with the memory do we have to modify the speed, we also have to adjust the timings, and furthermore we have to do a hardware modification. So let's take care of the software side of things, save this BIOS, and then I'll meet you guys up on the hardware side. So the memory mod really threw me for a loop. I knew that there were two ways to do this. There's one way where you can basically tap into TP503 and TP504 with a resistor, and you can bump the voltage up that way. Silver CR used a 8.2k ohm resistor, and that brought the voltage up to 2.48. It seems like that worked for him. Unfortunately for me, 2.48 volts was not enough. The card would run stable sometimes, but it would occasionally lock up. So then, as I kept reading, I saw Master Chief 79's own custom voltage mod, where basically he stacked a 10k resistor on top of this little thing right here, this existing 730 ohm resistor, and that seemed to get his voltage for his memory up to 2.5 volts. Not only does this look a lot more clean, but it also seems to be the more reliable way of doing this, as I found out on my own. Call me Dompe the Gravekeeper, the way I be digging up graves here. Oh. Alright, here we go. We'll do this, and then we will be back, hopefully in Windows. Okay, it's been a couple days and we're back. Now, aside from the crazy high temperature you may notice there, as you can tell, things are working, and I'm super excited. Why don't we power down the computer and pull the card out and talk about it real quick. So this is more or less the final state of the card. The back of the card is where we want to draw our attention here. While I was chasing down my stability problems, someone suggested to me to put little heat sinks on the MOSFETs, and it just so happened that I had some of these. So I did go ahead and do that, and obviously didn't solve my problem because the problem was related to the memory voltage, as we'll see, but I guess it doesn't hurt to have the little heat sinks on here. I do find that they get pretty hot. I grabbed multiple of these 103 marked 10k ohm resistors, and none of them ever seemed to do anything when I would stack them. I don't understand why. So being the true idiot that I am, I just started picking off random tiny little black resistors that are unmarked, just like the ones that are there, and stacking them on top till I got something that worked. It actually only took me 2 tries. The first try, the card started artifacting like crazy, even in the BIOS, which was kind of funny. But the second time, it just worked. And now it seems to work okay. So I'll be honest with you, I have no clue what voltage the memory is running at right now, but it seems to be enough to get it to run at 500 megahertz. But that's the reality of modding these cards. It's actually a little bit more involved, and you have to be a bit more knowledgeable than just most regular people, myself included. If you think I know what I'm doing, you are sorely mistaken. I'm just an idiot with access to decent tools, and that's about it. Oh, and the internet, I guess. Like, I'll be honest, I don't have a multimeter, nor do I even know how to use one. I keep saying, oh, I gotta learn how to do that. I gotta buy one and learn how to use it. And I just never do. And while there are definitely some Quadro cards that take zero effort to unlock into their GeForce counterpart, the fact of the matter is that you shouldn't be paying a ton for these cards, because in some cases, you are not guaranteed full unlockability into something far greater than what the card currently is. And I've just seen prices of these cards go up and up and up and up and up, and I wonder, why are people paying this amount of money for something that technically could maybe do something more, but isn't in a state where it's doing that, so there's no guarantee that it actually can. The whole reason for the modding scene behind these cards to begin with is that they used to be worth nothing. Rather than paying like $100 or something for a 5900 Ultra, you could just go on eBay to some recycling place and pay $15 for a Quadro FX 3000, modify the BIOS and flash the straps, boom, you're done. And that was the appeal for the Quadro FX 1000. These were crappy cards. They were not good. With some know-how and tools though, as you can see, some of them will unlock to a 5800 Ultra. But it takes effort, it takes risk, it takes time, takes lots of testing, and it really takes knowledge. Maybe less so these days because a lot of people have experimented with these by now, but in the beginning, it really took knowledge. So if you can find these Quadro cards for super cheap, which sadly is not really the case these days, but sometimes still is, I encourage you to pick one up and play around with it. It's a lot of fun. But please, for the love of God, do not enable these idiots who try to sell these cards on eBay thinking that they're worth gold. Yes, this is basically, for most people, the only affordable and kind of easy way to get into NV30, but it shouldn't mean that these are all of a sudden worth $100, $200, $300. And the same goes for like any other Quadro card basically, like this FX 3000. If you see this for $100 and you see a 5900 Ultra for like $130, I wouldn't buy either. Please don't buy either, because you're just enabling these people. But if you absolutely had to buy one, just get the Ultra. It's already more collectible because it's the actual consumer card. It's not the professional sort of weirdly slightly modified card. It just has more collectible value. The whole purpose of these cards in the retro scene or the vintage scene, whatever you want to call it, from the very get-go has been affordable performance for vintage systems. Basically, the takeaway here is don't spend tons of money on these Quadro cards. Don't enable sellers that think they're worth a ton of money. Because at the end of the day, while it would suck to be the chump who spent like $300 on a 5900 Ultra, I feel like it would suck even more to be the chump who spent like $180 on, I don't know, a Quadro FX 1000 thinking, oh, I'm going to make a 5800 Ultra out of it. It's going to be amazing. Only to find out that it's way more involved than what they have the skill set and the tool set to deal with. And it's going to cost money because maybe they don't have the components lying around to do the job and to adequately cool it. Let's make modding old crappy hardware affordable and fun again. Well, with that speech out of the way, what do you say we pit the 5800 Ultra up against the 5900 Ultra and see how big of an improvement the 5900 Ultra really was? So we're back in the DOS prompt and we're just running nvflash.exe-date-5-6 and then our ROM file. Do I remember what each of these switches do? No. I just know that it basically overrides all the stuff like you're seeing here, overriding sub-vendor strap. The EEPROM does not contain the valid, or does not contain the board ID. So essentially what we're doing here is we're going to press Y. Because we've given it a different device ID, that's why it's complaining. This is two steps now. So we're doing this step here because this is more the software side. When Windows and stuff loads, it sees this device ID. But you also have to do something where you update the straps, which is kind of the hardware level of changing how this device identifies itself. You could do this on the board itself by just moving, I believe, resistors around. So now that we've flashed the card with this new BIOS, we're not done yet. We need to flash the straps. The BIOS on this card still reports it as being a Quadro FX 1000. So there's actually two ways that this card kind of identifies itself or presents itself. And we've only really kind of done the software side of things. Essentially, we need to calculate straps that actually go and change the way this GPU presents itself in the BIOS. So then that way the BIOS is not saying that it's a Quadro FX 1000, but once you're loading into Windows it's saying it's a 5800 Ultra. This could cause problems. I've accidentally made this oopsie in the past. Amazingly enough, the card still behaved. I didn't get a black screen or whatever. It still worked, but don't risk it. Just do it right. Now, I would be lying if I said I know how to calculate these straps. Once upon a time, I kind of understood the theory. It's been years since I last looked at this post. I don't remember a single thing. So what I like to do is I actually like to take the straps because, or in the original post, the straps for this specific card for a 5800 Ultra are already given to us. So I just like to put them in a batch file. So here I should have something called straps.bat. And if I just run that, it should go in and there we go. It runs the command and it's going to do the straps for me. Because trying to type this out, you could make an error and then you might get yourself in a bit of a pickle. So we're just going ahead and updating the straps here. Now we're gonna reboot and hope that this works, and if all does work, we're gonna test it one more time, and then we basically take one last dump of the BIOS as kind of a final backup. And this updated dump that we take will contain both the flash straps and our modified BIOS, so we can very quickly switch between the two. And now on to the benchmark. Starting off with 3D Mark 2001 SE, we can see that the 5900 Ultra scores about 200 points higher. So would you call this margin of error, or would this be an actual improvement? I'm not too sure, but what I can tell you is that the 5900 Ultra starts off in the lead. Moving on to 3D Mark 2003, and we see that the 5900 Ultra continues in the lead by about 400 points, which is pretty decent. Do keep in mind this is a DX9 benchmarking suite, so now both the cards are starting to get pinned pretty hard. Now onto our first game. It's Call of Duty from 2003, which is an OpenGL title. The 5800 Ultra and the 5900 Ultra both smashed this title, absolutely zero problems at all. Even in the more intense scenes with explosions and stuff, they never dipped under 60 as we can see here, which is awesome. Now you gotta give credit to the 5900 Ultra because it did maintain a higher average, so for this I would say that it's still taking the lead here. You will notice that the 5800 Ultra does have a higher max, but I would just really choke that up to not being able to mimic exact movements both times I was benchmarking the cards. Both cards were pretty much neck and neck with Need for Speed Underground. However, the 5900 Ultra did come out with a higher minimum, so once again it claims victory. That said, I should also note that this game seems to have a frame cap of 61, so neither card could show us its true potential here, but in both cases they performed almost the same. In Doom 3, which I should mention is actually an OpenGL game, not a DX9 game. I mentioned that in my previous video and that's false, that's not right, so I apologize for that. We can see that both cards are basically performing the same. I ran just a simple time demo on Demo 1 with the used cache switch, and it's basically identical. Both cards are the same. So that has me wondering if at least for this title, my little Athlon 64 2800 Plus is not quite cutting it for some of these benchmarks. And we end things off with Halo Combat Evolved, which is one of the first, if not the first, DirectX 9 game to release, so how fitting to release it on Nvidia's first DirectX 9 GPU. Well, the results were not that great. In fact, it was kind of erratic. The 5900 Ultra obviously winning here for having the highest of everything between the min, max, and the average, but both times I played the game on both cards, it felt really bogged down the moment you engaged in combat, and I mean the numbers show for it. I feel like you probably could resolve this by turning down the settings a little bit, but otherwise both cards kind of struggled with this game. So what can I say about this entire little endeavor? Well, first off, congratulations to this Quadro FX 1000 for transitioning successfully to a GeForce FX 1500 Ultra. Okay, weird humor aside, it's been a fun one. There has been some headaches, but it was absolutely worth it in the end. Again, good luck finding a 5800 Ultra. They basically never come up and they sell for thousands at this point. It's really insane. So if you really want to try a 5800 Ultra for yourself, this is the next best thing. By all accounts, it is a 5800 Ultra. It's just physically not quite the same thing. But most people aren't going to care about that at this point. So if you can find a Quadro FX 1000 for cheap, and you think you're handy with a soldering iron and some other equipment, plus you have spare boards ready to pick things from, go ahead and do it. I think you're really going to have fun and you're really going to enjoy it. Thanks again for watching this video, and let me know what you think below. Is this modification a stupid waste of time, or is it entertaining and fun? The way this GPU presents itself in the BIOS, so then that way the BIOS is not saying it's a Quadro. Hi.